बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। मुअज़्ज़िज़ नाज़रीन, अर्बन डायलॉग के एक नए प्रोग्राम के साथ आपका मेज़बान नासिर जावेद। नाज़रीन, हम दुनिया के बेशतर ममालिक को उनके बड़े शहरों से पहचानते हैं। लंदन, टोक्यो, न्यूयॉर्क या इस्तांबुल सब अपने ममालिक की निस्बत ज़्यादा मशहूर भी हैं और अपने ममालिक की पहचान भी हैं। दरहकीकत बड़े शहर ही वो तमाम वसाइल, अफरादी क़ुव्वत, इल्म व दानिश और सरमाया फ़राहम करते हैं जो कौमों की तरक्की के लिए लाजमी है। लेकिन शर्त यह है कि शहर न सिर्फ बड़े हों बल्कि एफिशिएंट भी हों। बावजूद हमारे शहरों ने पिछले 40 सालों में जो तरक्की की है वो बैनुल-अक़वामी मेआर से बहुत कम है और उसकी वजह से हमारे शहरी और शहर गौनगू मसाइल से दो चार हैं। इन मसाइल के बारे में बात तो हमारे बहुत से अखबारात, चैनल्स और प्रोग्राम्स में होती है, मगर अर्बन डायलॉग एक ऐसा प्रोग्राम है जिसमें हम इन मसाइल के प्रोफेशनल और काबिल अमल पर हाल बात करने के लिए पाकिस्तान और दुनिया भर के माहिरीन और एक्सपर्ट से मुख्तलिफ़ प्रोग्रामों में बात करेंगे। हमारे मुल्क की आबादी जो कि तकरीबन 2% से बढ़ रही है, जबकि शहरों की आबादी इससे तकरीबन डबल रफ्तार से बढ़ रही है और उससे कहीं ज़्यादा रफ्तार से हमारे शहरों का फैलाव बढ़ रहा है। इस फैलाव की बुनियादी वजह यह है कि जी हम मुख्तलिफ़ शहरों को जो एग्जिस्टिंग उनका एरिया है उसको यूज़ करने की बजाय, कम्पैक्ट बनाने की बजाय या ऊपर जाने की बजाय हम उसके ज़मीनी फैलाव की तरफ तवज्जो दे रही हैं, जिसकी वजह से बहुत से मसाइल पैदा हो रहे हैं। इस मौजू के ऊपर बात करने के लिए आज हमारे साथ मेहमान हैं मिस्टर रॉब स्टोरी। Mr. Rob Story is a Canadian urban planner architect professional who has been working in more than 40 countries for the last 35 years and is considered an authority on the subject of cities. Today, we will be talking about the cities and their densities and urban sprawl as it affects us and how we can improve the densities in our cities. Welcome, Mr. Rob. We welcome you to this episode of Urban Dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Rao, briefly, would you kindly explain first what is meant by urban density and urban sprawl?
Urban density and urban sprawl. I guess it comes down to really the best use of resources. And we talk about urban density as maximizing the use of land, maximizing the use of infrastructure, which is maximizing the use of our investments, capital investments, human investments. Sprawl tends to, it's referring to cities going this way. And for the most part, this is not making good use of resources. And I think we're all extremely aware, certainly over the last couple of decades, that our resources are finite. And what we have, we need to manage. Many cities in the more developed world are sprawling by design, or have been. In emerging economies such as here in Pakistan, they are simply sprawling by default. And we find that they're moving out unplanned, absorbing agricultural land, other natural resources land. That's the first resource that's being severely impacted. And the minute you disturb land, you disturb water, and the whole thing begins to spiral.
Mr. Rob, in the last few years, we have seen that cities like Lahore and Rawalpindi especially, they have been expanding at more than what the population growth has been. And as we can see on this map, we did an analysis of the spread of Lahore. So as Lahore, what area Lahore covered in 1990, and what it covers in 2015, we have seen then the overall average density has been going down. Yeah. And we did some projection that, as we can see on this map, that when it is another 15 to 20 years, and probably the total footprint of Lahore would be twice as it is of today, despite the fact that the population may not be twice as much. What would be the main impact of this sprawl on our efficiency and economy of the city?
Well, I mentioned first of all just the use of resources, using up the land. Infrastructure is expensive.
How infrastructure is expensive? While many people believe that building high rises is more expensive than building a low rise, and they think since we have an abundance of land in Punjab, there is no harm in occupying more space. So how do you explain that infrastructure is more expensive if we go for a sprawl?
Well, if you have to put in a kilometer of water pipe and low density and it's serving 20 houses on this side and 20 houses on that side, and if it's $1 million a kilometer, you do the math and it's X per house. If you put in that same kilometer with high rises, it's probably X divided by 50, X divided by 100, so one's per capita investment on infrastructure goes down drastically.
So one is water. What other infrastructure becomes more expensive?
They all become more expensive.
So what you mean to say that if we make cities compact and go a bit more high rises and relax the building rules to allow higher densities, you think the cost of providing water, sewerage, and maybe transport?
Absolutely, absolutely. It goes down.
How transport goes down? I mean, can we just narrate something on this?
Well, a couple of things. The world is still fascinated with automobiles, but I think they're beginning to realize that this is perhaps not sustainable and we need to push for more public transit. Public transit is a business like anything else. It requires a certain market, it requires a certain...
Means public transport like bus service?
It could be buses, it could be informal little vans, it could be more sophisticated rail.
How does that bus service is impacted by the size of the city or the sprawl or the densities or the...
Well, like everything else, if a driver has to go 10 kilometers to fill the bus, he's consuming fuel and time inefficiency. If with density he goes 100 meters and fills the bus, you can see the economics of operating that kind of infrastructure.
Right. So you mean to say that if we rather than increasing the footprint of the cities, if we make them more compact and dense, we would require less of resources for supplying water to the same number of population, our sewerage pipelines, our road network, our transport network.
The whole thing. Plus we begin to ensure that we have a food supply in the future as well. And transporting that food supply becomes less costly because it's produced much closer to the market, this population mass. So it's all connected.
But as is a common knowledge that fuel prices are going down, so isn't it now more efficient to have a broader space and a more closer in the times of closer to land?
Fuel prices going down?
Yeah, that is what the oil pricing is.
For a little while, but don't forget resources are finite. At some point, it's going to go back up again. I'm not an expert on how much of this is resource-based or political-based.
Say it again, but you said you cannot go up again. What does that mean?
I'm saying resource prices will go up again.
Will go up again.
Will go up again. It's all based on finite. Population goes up, supply goes down, what happens?
Welcome back to the Urban Dialogue. So, Mr. Rob, we were talking about the energy and going high-rise versus sprawl. So you said that it is less expensive in terms of energy, but there's a common perception that Pakistan being an energy scarce country, we need more energy to cool down, heat up, and using the operating lifts for high rises, isn't it?
I don't have the numbers on Pakistan, but I know there was a study published recently on North American cities, and they did a carbon footprint assessment, which is basically a measure of energy consumption. And a person living out in the suburbs, it has a carbon footprint 9 times that of an inner city high-rise dweller. And I think this is not just talking about daily operating costs, but it's the fact you're consuming valuable land, the extra cost of bringing in food, the extra cost of building all that infrastructure, plus of course the obvious commuting costs. So again, I'm not the expert, but it seems to me there's a huge benefit to being compact.
But one area, Mr. Rob, that I would like to discuss, and that is not really kind of technical, but more social and cultural. Mm-hmm. Many people in Punjab especially, and in many other parts of the northern parts of the country believe that going high-rise is somehow not part of our culture, traditions, or religion. And you have worked in the Middle East and Africa. What is your take on this?
It's a common feeling to make that cultural transition. All of us, every culture, started out on the ground, and then as other realities came into being, we started to making those alterations. I'm working with a young chap here in Lahore who is actually renting an apartment away from his family. There's the beginning of a shift, a cultural shift, and I don't think it's something that can be forced. We're seeing this transition in many countries. People beginning to realize, I mean, the social fabric's changing, family structures are changing, priorities are changing, and it's being accepted. And I think it comes from a demand-driven rather than supply-driven approach.
And anything to do with the religion, that Islam doesn't actually, some kind of, your experience around the world, what does it say?
I don't know Islam, but I have worked in Islamic countries that high-rise is not a problem. Some of the ancient cities the famous ancient cities of Yemen, for example, Old Sana'a, Shibam, often referred to as the Manhattan of the desert, 6, 7 floors of mud building.
And what year was that? What year was that built? Shibam you said.
Shibam started 1,000 years ago. Most of the buildings in there now are not more than 400 years old. It's mud. It keeps regenerating, rebuilding itself out of the very earth that it's built on. Totally sustainable kind of building. But
and it is more than 6 and 7 stories.
Yes.
And it was built by Muslims, as you said.
Yes.
And perhaps that was inhabited by Muslims. And that was perhaps long before the actual Western countries or the European countries started building high-rise, maybe.
Oh, for sure. They had it figured out long before anybody in Chicago did. You mentioned Dubai. I don't know where Dubai fits into this. It's an anomaly of some sort.
It is an anomaly of a sort, but it is still, I mean, what we can assure, and we have seen, and as you can see in the picture as well, that in fact Peshawar also is now going high-rise. There are a number of flats that we have seen, multi-story, almost 20 stories, and people are living there for reasons of security and ease of commuting. So I don't think this should be any kind of a mindset. It's more of a mindset that needs to be.
Well, in the bit I've seen of the few Pakistani cities that I'm familiar with, we don't even have to talk high-rise. We just have to talk efficient use of the land that's there.
And what would that mean in terms of number of stories? For example,
maybe 4 or 5, even walkable. Walkable, let's put the limit on what you can comfortably walk up to leave the mechanics out of it. But if you take the bureaucracy of land ownership and the politics out of it and simply look at a physical image of any of Pakistan's cities, there are huge amounts of undeveloped or underdeveloped or derelict properties within what people think is totally built up with no more room for people. Through that kind of regeneration, redevelopment, I think the next 20, 30, 40 years of population growth could actually be absorbed in there. That, of course, is, as I said, eliminating the bureaucracy and the politics and all these other realities.
So what we are saying is basically that rather than expanding the cities, we should focus more on what is called the infill development, that vacant spaces are increasing the densities in the existing cities, and that would be more efficient.
Absolutely.
Right. But now coming to the more practical aspects of finding a solution to this, what exactly would you suggest or recommend in terms of the regulatory framework or the institutional design that our cities need to do that in another 10 or 20 years, we also gain some densities of the developed world?
First of all, you mentioned institutions, the key.
Okay.
The institutions are in place in Pakistan on paper, and the org diagrams are all in place. The capacities are not always there to fill those slots.
Right.
And certainly I think the institutions and their responsibilities and what their mandates are more importantly, they're not institutionalized. In other words, they're not accepted as a given fact, and these are the rules that one plays by. They may be there, but someone told me that 90% of the planning in one of the cities we're working in is actually taking place under the table rather than on the table. So unless we address, it's the institutional thing to start with.
Institutions which is to start with.
And a respect for those institutions by the entire population, beginning with the highest level decision makers and right on down to the guy who thinks he can get away with building something illegal overnight.
Okay, so one is that we should actually improve our institutions. What else in terms of some building bylaws or land use rules, or what would you suggest in that?
Well, again, I think many of those are in place. Some need a little bit of adjusting. I know there are limits on building heights in some places. There's limits on density. Those can be relaxed a bit. And there's regulations about gaining planning approval and development approval.
What exactly you mean by institutional capacity?
A number of things, but starting with people's skills, people's knowledge, people's expertise.
People mean people working in the...
People working in all levels of government, be it national, provincial, district, municipal, down to the TMAs or municipal corporations. And this is urban planners, it's engineers, it's environmentalists, it's sociologists, it's economists, finance people, and working together, not sitting in their separate offices.
But I believe we have these urban planners and town planners and building control officers at the city level and including even in TMAs. Don't you think there's enough, or we need some more of this?
Well, I'm working right now in Sialkot and Saiwal.
Okay.
They have one urban planner each, they have one engineer each.
For the entire city?
For the entire city, and we're talking about Sialkot of maybe 1 million people in the next little while. And it's one urban planner that is operating in an environment where he's not respected, not acknowledged. He's never spoken to the engineer. How does one integrate? We need integration on
Integration on that. And what is your suggestion that in terms of a city of, say, population, Sialkot, which is almost 1 million, how many urban planners or building control officers there should be?
1 million people? Wow. I mean, I come from a city of about 1 million people.
Okay.
We probably have 40 or 50 urban planners, plus transport planners, plus a number of infrastructure planners. Development control officers, I have no idea. But development control is institutionalized. You don't go and build something where you're not supposed to, how you're not supposed to. And everybody respects that.
Respects that.
I know that the control officers in Saiwal, they have no vehicles.
They don't have any vehicles, so how would they manage?
Yeah, they share one around when somebody else isn't using it. There's no fuel. There's no respect for their positions.
So people really don't actually care for the implementation of these rules and regulations is a big challenge. That is,
implementation is simply not happening.
It is simply not happening.
It's the starting point, and I think it must start at the top. Someone at the top must say, "This is a priority," and works its way down. I know there's many keen, frustrated people at the bottom that have formal education, want to apply that, and are being restrained.
Welcome back to Urban Dialogue. Mr. Rob, we were talking about compact cities and urban sprawl. Can you say, based on your experience in the 40 countries that you have worked, can you give us some idea of what the other countries of similar socioeconomic condition are near about that in the neighboring, like India, China, how they are handling this problem?
Well, I could start by saying right here in Punjab, they've recognized the problem, and the latest Punjab Urban Development Plan 2018, I believe, has first acknowledged that cities are the heart, the soul, the center of economic development, and the future is based on 2 words. They said density and agglomeration. So they realize that the sprawl is not going to work. India, doing some similar things. They're a little more focused around, I mean, they have a history of high density building, but also they're trying to get rid of sprawl by going into public transit and transit-oriented high density development.
Okay, right.
I'm working in China right now on some...
What cities are you working with?
Working up in the northwest, Xinjiang province, some cities outside of Urumqi that are about the size of Saiwal. China, of course, over the last 30 years has gone through a totally different form of urban development, and it's been a totally supply-driven one. And it's meant a lot of overbuilding of buildings, a lot of overbuilding of infrastructure, huge consumption of land. They came out last year with their new style urban development policy, 2012-2020.
Okay, and what does that say?
It says, it starts off by saying, we have messed things up over the last 30 years. This is an unsustainable approach. We have to turn around, become compact. Instead of having land-based development approach, we need a people-based development approach. Okay. Instead of an industrial and economic based approach, we need an environmentally sustainable approach. So they are just at that point of acknowledging where they're at and beginning to turn it around. Now, if I jump out to a more developed, again, my own home, and I think North American cities are probably the worst in terms of wasting land, that whole form of suburban development.
But perhaps
is
because
hopeless.
Canada has a lot of land, so they can afford to waste it. Maybe that's the reason.
Same perception that is becoming a misperception as one has the same problem. So what's happening in my city of Calgary, again, 1 million population, we have the same form of high-rise spreading out to the suburbs. Politicians and planners and everybody are saying we've got to slow this down. And yes, it's going to take a while to transition all of this, but now you find that the new developments are 4 times as dense, even around the edges, as the suburbs of 20 years ago. And there's a huge move back into the city where people are recognizing this commute thing tied up on the mall for hours is just not a sustainable use of my time.
Rather than using the time in commuting, you can use it more productively in terms of
Absolutely.
making money.
Yeah. I'm living in Manila right now. Manila estimates they waste $53 million a day through traffic jams.
$53 million a day through
Per
traffic
day
jams.
through people sitting and trying to commute.
Oh my God, and probably we might be close. We don't have studies, but might be closer to these in our large cities, especially of peak hours. The way we have to commute at times 30 kilometers away from our place of work to go into these places. Mr. Rob, then one more issue that I would like to highlight. There's a common perception that especially because of some of the fire and earthquake incidents in our cities, that if we have higher buildings more than 2 or 3 stories high, they somehow are insecure and unsafe if there is a fire incident or earthquake or some other collapse. How the world is actually handling this issue?
Institutional again. Rules and regulations and building codes that probably exist here as well as anywhere else, but they're institutionalized. They're actually enforced. You don't have incidents such as the last year's factory collapse in Dhaka where all the fire exits were locked, chained and bolted up. Those things simply don't exist. If we move into better urban management, the streets will function.
Okay.
Even the streets of Sialkot and Saiwal don't function. They're not managed. They're choked up. If rapid response vehicles need to move, they can't do that. So it's again ensuring that these rules are actually implemented, respected. There's no shortcuts. There's no way you shortcut your way around it to save having to put in a stairway or something.
There is no way to do that.
Yeah.
Right. What advice would you give to the city planners in the cities in Pakistan as to how can they make the optimum or the most efficient use of the land which is already existing in the city areas?
The challenge seems to be to have planners accept the challenge of actually managing a city. And the tendency in many places throughout the world is to look at downtown Saiwal, for example. It's chaotic, it's a mess. The planners, the politicians, everybody says, there's no hope. They jump out to greenfield, start to build again. There's urban sprawl. The answer is to take, it's a more difficult, it's a more process-oriented approach, but manage the inner city so that it becomes an attractive place.
So the first priority should be to manage the existing cities that we have, areas built up, rather than going into the new housing colonies. That is
absolutely. Again, back to the very fundamental, make the maximum use of land and infrastructure that
we already
in
have.
place.
Okay.
Yep.
Meaning, can you give some examples of how can we actually do that, or some kind of citywide planning as to what place, what institutions, or what land uses should be within the city and what land uses could be actually moved to the periphery?
Well, the most sustainable and efficient cities are mixed-use cities.
Mixed-use cities.
It's one of the things that North America got completely wrong when somebody invented the word zoning.
Zoning.
It made them totally unsustainable. Traditional cities here, existing cities here are mixed use. That's the starting point.
So this is a very important point, Mr. Rob. Hold on for a moment. I would like to hear more on this, because what we commonly every day hear is that we must have zones. This is industrial zone, this is residential zone, this is commercial zone, and any change of land use really becomes a very, very big issue. So what is meant, you are giving a totally different approach, that of mixed use. What does that mean?
Mixed use, it means zoning the city instead of commercial, industrial, residential, zone it as real life.
Zoning is real life.
People live, they work, they play.
Right.
They must shop, they visit, they have social interaction. So how do you make all of that work? Why do we all love going to old European cities? They function that way. They're mixed use. Zoning tends, there's a need for some zoning, but
of course, like heavy industry of can't be
heavy
really in the
industry,
middle of the
things where it may have a negative impact, but to, for example, take all of the street vendors that are so-called encroaching on the downtown and the downtown streets and say, okay, we're going to move all of these guys out to a vendor's thing 20 kilometers out of town.
It's not going to work.
I guarantee by 9:30 they're back on the street because they have assessed the market. That's where they need to be. That's where their
Of course,
customers
they can't
are.
really do any business on the periphery.
They can't do any business on the periphery. So manage that. I mean, I don't have a real number. I do know that 75% of employment in Sialkot and Saiwal is in the informal sector.
It is, it indeed is. In fact, most of the cities, even in larger cities, it is more or less the same numbers.
And I would guess that maybe 90% of the actual economy takes place in the informal sector, and 100% of the residents interact with it somehow. And yet I have never seen a formal city plan that formalizes recognition and space for the informal sector.
It's a very interesting point. I think
it needs to be done somehow without formalizing it to the point where they're no longer able to function. Yeah. Then in terms of actually making densification and regeneration work, from that starts with institutions and first accept the concept and say, okay, we need to do this. Taxation is one approach. I think taxes, property taxes are in place here in theory. I think they're somewhat nominal. I don't know what kind of collection rate there is.
Not really nominal. It is, I mean, in an average house of say 1 canal that we have, in a posh area in Lahore, it would probably be paying around 10 to 15,000 rupees. I mean, compared to most of the cities, yes, it is less, but we recently revised these rates. And now that with computerization, even the collection rates have improved significantly.
But assuming that inner city land is worth more than peripheral land, taxation should be higher on inner city land, which means that unless you're an extremely wealthy person, you can't afford to be sitting on a piece of land that's undeveloped or in derelict condition or less than maximum development. You need to either build that to keep yourself above, floating financially, or sell it to someone who can. And on top of that, it has to be a nice place to be. And how do you make it a nice place to be? You manage those streets, as we talked about, so that you can move. You have transport so you can get there. You have water that works so that in the city you have those services. You have some green space, you have the school, you have health facilities, all those things that are live, work, and play. And if they're in a pleasant place, most people like a social network. And you don't get a social network in a suburb. You can build a social network with a bit more density. So I think taxation is one way of doing it. You can have.
But this point of social networking, again, I would like to highlight it for the interest of our audience, that in the old cities, like we had in old city in Lahore or Multan, this mahalla life that we called, sitting in the chopal and interaction with each other, people knew each other who are living, is still valued very much compared to the suburbs where even we don't know who lives in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So this is another very important point that I think we must come back to our roots.
Back to the roots. That's how the cities functioned. And there's lots of space, even in the old mahallas in the inner cities, there's lots of space for regeneration, attracting people back in, again, the ones that have moved out.
Mr. Rab, I have one more question that I would like to ask you is about, you said we need institutions and we need different regulations. But is there any other tools and techniques to motivate or incentivize people for infill development rather than sprawl?
Financial is always a good one. One can be given, even with, pardon me?
Money always speaks.
Money always speaks, yes. So sometimes a relaxation, even further relaxation for density, if you're building density, or you buy density off of another lot, or you transfer some of this density around, is
So we can give some tax incentives to incentivize people to build within the inner city, or tax higher tax in the periphery, or what exactly?
well, first of all, you have a disincentive to sit on vacant land by taxing that, and then you can provide a tax incentive if you begin to build a bit more mixed use.
Right. So basically, we should tax the vacant land as well. So this is an important point, because most of the cities of Pakistan, we really don't have a property tax on the vacant land.
Exactly. So it sits vacant. And in the meantime, all this expensive infrastructure is going by the property line with nobody paying for it. Cities can't afford to operate that way.
And what is the next second that you said, other than increasing tax on vacant land?
Well, I was going to say that to get the mixed city, and cities, one of the common words now is inclusive cities, and inclusive means accommodating a full spectrum of socioeconomic groups. So rather than having a private developer simply build the luxury, high-profit houses, they can be given tax incentives to have a social mix, and if it's not in that building next door, there's a public park that is paid for and sustainably maintained. There's some shops, which in turn are places of employment. That mixed use also reduces the need for these guys to travel somewhere to get whatever they need.
So this would also increase this.
Yeah, two simple things like that.
Two simple things. Any other message that you would like to convey to conclude this program on regarding this urban sprawl and compactness?
It's a universal nightmare, and I think I'm very, very pleased to see Punjab's new urban development strategy. I was very pleased to find that China's doing that. I'm pleased to see that we're turning these cities around all over the world, because we simply cannot be consuming resources in an uncontrolled manner.
And land, of course, that is not being produced anymore.
Exactly. There's a bit of a limit on that.
Right.
Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rob.